Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Modern Midwest Mobility webinar series, also known as MCube or M3, hosted by the University of Kansas Transportation Center. I am Nikila or Nikki, and I'll be today's webinar moderator. And before we start today's webinar on electric vehicles at airports and how they apply to you, I would like to mention a few things. Please feel free to post your names and your company name in the chat box to see if your friends are here and who else is here as we are in a webinar mode. And please remember to use the chat or Q&A option, the feature that you have if you have any questions during and after the presentation. And we have some interesting and fun questions with our speakers today. So feel free to use the chat box. We highly encourage that. Let's make this presentation more fun and interactive. And for some reason, if you're disconnected, please try logging in or email me. I'll post my information in a moment in the chat box here. And lastly, next month, we are having something exciting related to artificial intelligence on payment management. So stay tuned and you will be receiving emails from KUTC soon. And again, thank you so much for your time and for being here today with us to know more about the electric vehicles. So today's webinar is presented by our lovely speakers, Emily and Miriam from Metropolitan Energy Center, also called as MEC in Kansas City. So Miriam joined MEC in December 2019 as a program coordinator. She previously worked for the Missouri Department of Economic Development as an economic development incentive specialist for the Community Development Block Grant Program. She received her bachelor's in business administration with concentration on international business and minors in French and economics from Truman State University. She's currently working on her master's of public administration at Southeast Missouri State University. When Miriam has free time, she enjoys hiking Missouri's many state parks and conservation areas with her dog and exploring new restaurants in Kansas City. Welcome, Miriam. And we also have Emily with us today. So Emily joined MEC in 2019. In addition to leading MEC's policies and advocacy efforts, she is the program coordinator for Terminal Truck Electrification Project. Prior to joining MEC, Emily worked at a health information technology corporation for over 6 years, spending 3 years on their benefits and wellness team. She managed multiple programs and events for employees all over the world. However, she decided to change her career path and received a master's degree in social work in 2019. More than ever, Emily believes social workers have an ethical responsibility to advocate for a sustainable future, ensuring everyone is included. Emily is a lifelong resident of Kansas City, Kansas, and during her free time, she enjoys antique shopping, spending some time with her friends, family, and her favorite person on the planet, her niece, Grace. So welcome, Miriam and Emily. We are so happy to have you here. And now the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having us today. As Nikki mentioned, I'm Emily Wolf, and I'm with Metropolitan Energy Center, and my teammate are MEC Sustainable Program Manager, Miriam. So a quick overview of the agenda today. So we're going to give a quick overview of our organization, Clean Cities Coalitions, you may have heard of, best practices and lessons learned for fleet electrification. So while we're focusing on airport shuttle buses, these lessons learned and best practices can be applied to other fleets. A quick overview of some other electric vehicle projects we have going on, and then we'll open it up for questions. So as Nikki mentioned, we're MEC. We've been around since 1983. We originally were founded in the KCMO neighborhoods to help them improve the energy efficiency of their homes and buildings. So that's of course expanded over the years. We have our building performance program. So we provide training, resources, and outreach to commercial and residential builders, building owners, and as well as renters. So if you have any questions regarding your home's efficiency, your building's efficiency, definitely reach out. We also have a Project Living Proof demonstration home in the heart of Kansas City, Missouri. And so this is where residents can go and learn about how to make their homes more efficient and healthier and safer. And you can also host events there. So contact us if you need more information. But obviously today we are talking about transportation. So really the cornerstone of our transportation programs lies in our Clean Cities Coalition. So MEC has the honor of hosting the Kansas City Regional Clean Cities Coalition, as well as the Central Kansas Clean Cities Coalition. So not sure if you're familiar with the Clean Cities program or not. It's through the Department of Energy. It was started in 1992. And so there are almost 80 coalitions across the US. And so really what the coalition's job is to support businesses, municipalities, individuals to meet their clean transportation goals. So really we're experts in our coordinators and staff on new transportation technology as well as alternative fuels. So not just electric vehicles, but hydrogen, biodiesel, natural gas, propane. So we connect businesses and municipalities to funding, resources, and education. So really, if you have any transportation question, reach out to your Clean Cities coordinator because they can get you pointed in the right direction, especially now as all this federal funding is coming down. There's a lot of opportunities to go on. It can definitely be really overwhelming and it's great, but also can be really, again, overwhelming. So reach out to us with your transportation questions. We can definitely get you pointed in the right direction. So to get started today, as Nikki mentioned, we're gonna do a quick trivia question. I know everyone likes engaging in webinars, but the quick question is approximately how many passengers fly every day in and out of US airports? You wanna put your guess in the chat. So approximately how many passengers fly every day in and out of US airports?
Yes, please answer. The closest answer will get a gift card.
Oh.
I'm just kidding. Sorry, not promising.
Okay. Well, the answer is 2.9 million. So what this means is there's a lot of people coming and going from airports, as well as, engaging in transportation within airports, which means a lot of emissions, a lot of opportunities to implement new, clean, more efficient technology. So again, a lot of opportunities there. And so kind of why we're presenting to you today. So some of you may be familiar, but in 2017, the Kansas City International Airport, KCI, became the first US airport to deploy all electric shuttle buses. So the buses, when you arrive at the airport, they will take you to the airport if you're far away parking and then take you to your car afterwards. So far, they have deployed 7 EV buses, including through 3 where they received funding through a grant project with MEC and the Department of Energy. Because we worked with KCI on this project as well as others, the Department of Energy asked our organization to create a deployment guide. And so here are the phases of the guide, and we're finalizing it now, so we can definitely get that sent out to you all hopefully in a couple of weeks. As you can see, there is a lot of information. So we broke the guide down into 5 phases: project evaluation, determine the project scope, pre-deployment, actually deploying the vehicles, and then kind of what's next, sustaining the project and future opportunities. Since this is a lot, we're not going to go through every section, but highlight some of the lessons learned and best practices that we thought were really interesting and would be helpful. And so when I was working on this guide, of course, I found lots of helpful resources, attended webinars, but I also wanted to talk to the people who were actually doing it. So I talked to fleet manufacturers, fleet managers from several airports, additional Clean Cities coordinators, in addition to obviously KCI and our staff as well. So really tried to get a broad perspective and document what they found helpful and would do differently in the future. So again, we're going to kind of go through some of those best practices and lessons learned. One of the first important things is to identify the key decision makers and what motivates them. So Kenny Williams was the former fleet manager at KCI who spearheaded the deployment of the EV buses. And actually prior to that, he was also ahead of his time when the airport deployed compressed natural gas shuttle buses. So even prior to the EV buses, they were well ahead. But he said when he was looking at bringing EV buses to KCI, he said he involved as many people as possible in his exploratory phase, even his critics. He said, when they were questioning this new technology, he said he challenged them to think about what was possible with electric shuttle buses instead of focusing on what they could not do. And he said one way to demonstrate the quieter, cleaner, and smoother ride of electric battery shuttle buses, he had BYD, the vehicle manufacturer ultimately chosen by KCI, bring one of the buses to KCI so airport personnel could experience firsthand the benefits of riding the electric vehicles. And so he said after that, they were hooked. And on the right side, you'll see there early on, a lot of people describe airports as mini cities because there are so many different departments and moving parts. So here on the right side are some people to think about you want to engage early on and kind of share with them why this is beneficial. So for the airport chief financial officer, the economic benefits reduced operational costs on the buses and lower maintenance and fuel expenses. And also an opportunity to be a leader in a new technology and showing firsthand how that can also lower your fuel costs. Airport drivers and technicians, while their buy-in may not necessarily be necessary, Williams said it's extremely important. He said, because they will be the ones driving the vehicles. And he said he communicated with staff that working with EVs would make them more valuable and provide the opportunity for them to be experts in a new technology. In addition to that, obviously the benefits of a quieter, cleaner ride, they can hear what's going on behind them. There's less driver fatigue. So again, promoting that healthier and safer work environment. Some of those benefits as well transfer over to what maybe motivate fleet managers and human resources. And again, the opportunity to deploy best-in-class vehicles. Community members, this is really important. You want them to be on board. They'll have a better experience at the airport. There'll be reductions in air pollution, and then it will likely spur interest in additional sustainable practices and projects citywide. The airport marketing department, obviously there's a ton of opportunities for them there to promote deploying EV buses, health, cost savings, a better experience for visitors of the city. And then of course, mayor, city council, city manager, and other policymakers, they can say they were part of their commitment to engaging in emerging technology, better air quality, and limiting the dependence on fossil fuels and foreign fuels. And then director of aviation, as we're seeing a lot, there are more and more federal emission reduction regulations. So the sooner you deploy EV buses, you'll get ahead of those regulations. So you're not reactive, but more proactive. Because there are a lot of moving parts, it's important to assign a project lead. So I spoke to Tony Catamarti, the fleet program manager for the city of Everett, who deployed electric shuttle buses in their transit program. And he said, which I've heard from anyone who's deploying an electric vehicle, purchasing the truck or vehicle is one thing, but installing the infrastructure is a whole nother ballgame when you're just buying a diesel bus. So he explained it as a complete system approach. And so one lessons learned, he said that he learned from his project when they were deploying EV buses. He said they had one person, a dedicated project manager throughout the entire process who led the bus procurement. So they were in charge of identifying, okay, what bus are we going to use and what is the best should we go with? And then they had another person focus on the infrastructure. And he said that's something definitely they would change in the future because it caused a lot of miscommunication and delays. He said something they will change for future projects. So it's because there are so many moving parts, it should be clear to internal and external stakeholders who is leading the project. And they should really have a hand in every aspect. Communication with staff, project partners, infrastructure implementation, and then also there's going to be some operational changes. So really they need to be known as the go-to person and project lead. So that is one thing definitely that Tony stressed when I met with him about their experience. Another thing that pretty much everyone I spoke to, again, same with the vehicle manufacturers, the fleet managers, the utilities obviously said, engage with your electric utility as soon as possible. Again, the most complicated thing likely deploying the EVs is ensuring you have adequate power to charge your fleet at a reasonable rate. So again, transportations are a complex system. I mean, airports, size and scope of an airport system adds additional challenges when determining your electricity capacity. At airports, as I'm sure you're well aware, there are several types of infrastructure at different locations with varying owners and charging requirements. So there's customer employee parking. Well, they need EV charging. There's third-party fleets. Again, maybe they have electric vehicles. There's airline equipment. So it can be difficult to determine who owns and operates each element in the airport's electric grid. And that's something the utility can help you work through. You also need to understand for the airport, their short-term and long-term transportation visions. So again, Evergy, Kansas City's local utility, when we spoke to them, said one of their things is they really need to meet, as well as airports, their customers' evolving needs. And so again, one benefit too of collaborating with your utility early on is that you may help influence the type of strategies they utilize when coming up with new tariffs or new rebates or new programs. By talking with them early on, maybe you can influence what kind of program you participate in, or by the time you deploy other electric vehicles, they may have new elements that are beneficial because you get engaged with them. But of course, there are factors that can impact the cost of charging your vehicles. So charging during peak use periods. So again, they encourage you to charge maybe possibly at the evening or possible when it's not as high as charges. Demand spikes in charging, which we'll talk about shortly. Your utility where you're located, they might not have an EV rate. So that's something that could potentially add cost. Or maybe they do have an EV rate, but only for residents, not for commercial vehicles. So those are all things you should go through this list when meeting with your utility and talk through them. But one topic that comes up a lot and kind of can be a little confusing is utility demand charges. And this is something I constantly try to wrap my head around. And so what it basically means is instead of being charged by how much energy you use, it's how much pressure you're putting on the grid. So one example that kind of helped me understand it better, if you have two 5-gallon buckets, if it takes you 5 minutes to fill up one bucket, you are charged per gallon. It doesn't matter how slow or fast. But then you could have another bucket that you filled up in 1 minute. So instead of being charged how much you filled up, you were charged at the rate. So obviously, if you're filling it up much quicker, you would be charged a higher rate. And so you should identify the cost of electricity to charge your vehicles per kilowatt hour, not just how much energy you use, paying special attention to possible demand charges incurred by charging your vehicles during peak demand. Again, this is something you should talk to your utility about. Stephanie Mine, the climate program manager at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, also a former Clean Cities coordinator, said it's critical for fleets to understand what causes demand charges and how they are inversely proportional to the monthly mileage of an electric fleet. So again, she had an experience with the county that they had to make adjustments because they were spending more to run their electric vehicles versus their diesel because of demand charges. So again, I think can't say it enough to talk to your utility as soon as possible. I also spoke to Proterra, a manufacturer of electric shuttle buses, and they stressed that as well, that that's something really beneficial when you reach out to them. Another one is to consider public and private partnerships. So there's a lot of resources out there. So obviously your Clean Cities coalitions, universities, businesses, building developers, the Alternative Fuels Data Center. It's a great resource if you've never checked it out. It's through the Department of Energy. It has more alternative fuel information than you could ever imagine. They said by incorporating a diversity of experience and expertise, your project will be more holistic and balanced. So one example was I talked to the fleet manager at Charlotte Douglas International Airport, and they recently deployed EV buses. And they said one thing that they did was they worked with Duke University to determine what size of chargers they would need for their new EV buses. At MEC, we have two projects for electric vehicles where we worked with, they were previously with Missouri Science and Technology, but since transferred to Penn State University. And they help us on two EV projects do data analysis. And when talking to that professor the other day, he always has a student help them on their projects. And he said, not only obviously is it beneficial for us to have a better understanding of the data behind the projects, but also he said it helps their students. You know, they graduate having experience in knowing about this new emerging technology. So again, it's not only good for your organization, but also, you know, people who are going to be working in this field. Also, too, something at MEC we've been trying to work on, and this, I know, definitely not an expert in it, but something probably could spend hours and hours on, is when conducting outreach. So maybe you have a request for information open, or you're looking at partners. Think about, are you talking to the same bubble you always talk to? You know, are you reaching out to universities? Do you have a historically Black college or university? Are you sending opportunities to them? Here, think about that. You know, think, oh, am I just reaching out to the same names and faces? I always do. And one interesting thing, I know many of you have probably seen the Kansas Business Journal have every year their lists of lists. So industry data for the Kansas City businesses. And they had lists for energy for minority-owned businesses, as well as women-owned businesses. So the top in the city. So again, just think about when you're doing outreach for partners and vendors, try to expand your horizon and work with new names and faces, because at the end, everyone will benefit because you'll have really forward thinking project. And now I'm going to hand it over to Miriam. She's going to do one more trivia question and then talk to you about developing a fleet profile. So I'll hand it over to you, Miriam.
Thank you, Emily. So I'm just going to talk really briefly about the health effects that a project like this can have, and also talk about cost of ownership and return on investment. So we can go ahead and start with this trivia question. And again, if you would please post your guesses in the chat. What percentage do you think that pediatric asthma has increased in the United States since 1982?
Let me know, Miriam, when you want the answer shown.
I can see a lot of answers ranging from 25% to 500%.
Oh, wow.
Okay, yeah, Emily, do you want to go ahead and show the answer? Yeah, it's 58%. And so one of the reasons that the rate of pediatric asthma has increased in the United States is from air pollution. And in particular, diesel exhaust has fine particulates that lead to immune system alterations, which can cause asthma. And so if you would like to learn more about local pediatric asthma, you can learn more about this at Children's Mercy Environmental Health Program. They have a great program to improve air quality and address asthma in local communities. And I also want to show these two maps here to show really what this looks like visually in our city of Kansas City. So on the left-hand side here, we can see a map of asthma rates from the US EPA, and those are national percentiles. And then on the right-hand side, we can see the map of the same general area, and that's diesel particulate matter. And so we can see here that there's a pretty clear overlap between the areas that have the highest asthma rates and the areas with the most diesel particulate matter. If you would like to learn more about how your community might be experiencing asthma and how diesel pollution or other forms of pollution could be contributing to that, you can use the Environmental Justice Screening and Mapping tool from EPA to look up your own community. But this is what Kansas City looks like. And so this is one reason why many airports and other entities are so interested in replacing heavy-duty diesel vehicles with electric. In the case of our airport, this is a particularly impactful project because airport shuttle buses run on diesel. They're heavy duty, they use a lot of fuel, and they emit a lot of pollution. And they run in a really small geographic area, so that diesel pollution is very concentrated. And so one thing that was very important to Kansas City in particular was protecting the health and safety of the folks that work at the airport and the folks that use that airport. So as we can see here, there are some real health benefits associated with reducing diesel, particularly in heavy duty vehicles. So next, let's talk a little bit about how to determine your costs and your return on investment. And the first thing in order to determine your return on investment or your total lifetime cost of the vehicle would be to determine the replacement schedule and right size your fleet. The first thing you want to do when determining your replacement schedule and right sizing your fleet is to research different vendors and research different vehicles from those vendors and get their recommendations on vehicle lifespans as well as battery lifespans and warranties, because all of this might come into consideration as you're determining your fleet's actual replacement schedule and how many vehicles you will need. A widely used rule of thumb is that the cost associated with retaining a vehicle must be at least 25% less than the costs associated with a new vehicle. So as you retain vehicles and they get older, that can increase your maintenance and repair costs. And as your vehicle is depreciating, your salvage value also decreases. So by determining an optimal replacement schedule, you can make sure that you replace your vehicles at a time before your maintenance and repair costs get too high, and while it still has some salvage value left in it. Overall, having an optimal replacement schedule and right sizing your fleet can increase efficiency and can also reduce service interruptions. And that's particularly important with the battery electric vehicle, because sometimes those ranges can be a little bit lower than your traditional diesel vehicles. So once you know your vehicle lifespan and your replacement and retained schedule, you're able to calculate your total cost of ownership of those vehicles and compare that against your diesel baseline and look at what your return on investment might be. One tool that's really great for that is from Argonne National Lab. It's called A-Fleet, and that can be used by Clean Cities stakeholders to conduct estimations. Now that's all default data. So if you'd like more data that's specific to your area, I would contact your local Clean Cities Coalition. Basically, when you're looking at your total cost of ownership and return on investment for an electric bus, you should understand that you will likely pay more upfront. An electric bus can cost a lot more than a diesel bus. In addition, you will also likely have to install charging infrastructure, and that can also be quite costly upfront. However, with an electric vehicle, you do typically save over time, both on fueling as well as on maintenance and repair, because electric buses have lower maintenance repair costs per mile than a diesel vehicle. Finally, a lot of electric vehicles are eligible for various incentive programs. And so that can offset that higher upfront cost and allow you to see a return on investment much more quickly. So this is just one example where we looked at potentially replacing some diesel buses with battery electric buses in a transit system. And in this case, we were looking at the scenario with a grant from the Federal Transit Administration. In this case, as you can see, we looked at what our annual savings would be, and we combined those fuel and maintenance savings. We looked at the higher additional cost of the electric vehicles that we'd have to pay. And as you can see in this example, that was pretty steep. And you will need to learn more about what it might look like for your airport by working with vendors and looking at different vehicle types. And the same goes for infrastructure costs. As you can see in this example, they were also quite steep. But with applying the grant across the board, we found that the amount of the grant and the incentives actually covered all of the additional upfront costs and then some. And so, and in this scenario, you would experience instant payback. And then from there on, experience annual savings of over $500,000 over that vehicle's lifespan. So this is just a quick summary of what the return on investment and total cost of ownership might consider. And again, it might vary for your particular airport. And so it's best to coordinate as much as possible with your partners, your utilities, and potential vendors.
All right, thank you, Miriam. Yeah, I know that's one benefit too of working with Clean City coordinators. Not only can they connect you to different funding sources, but also educate more, provide information on rebates, other incentives that you could possibly put them all together to help, purchase those vehicles. So thanks for sharing that information, Miriam. Definitely encourage you all to use that A-Fleet tool, and then of course, reach out to your Clean Cities coordinator. So obviously we quickly went through the deployment process. Obviously it takes a lot more, and that will be in additional information in the guide. But okay, one thing is to, okay, so you have deployed the buses. Okay, well now what? So now it's really important to monitor your results. So analyze your overall fuel expenses. So look at if you have a diesel shuttle bus and an EV shuttle bus on the same shift. Compare their performance and use additional telematics provided by your vendor if you have telematics data collected. Again, as Miriam mentioned, look at service disruption data. What caused those disruptions? What could you change? And if you need to get a core team to really investigate some of these issues, encourage you to do that. Communicate needed improvements to those who can make those improvements. So again, share that feedback with your Clean Cities coalitions and your utilities. Again, you can help inform what programs and policies are implemented so they're more beneficial to you all and easier to participate in. Also too, when this communicate needed improvements, definitely have, again, the people who will be utilizing these are the drivers and the technicians. So make sure you have a way to get their feedback, because honestly, that's more valuable than anyone, the people using the technology day in and day out. So really find a process to get that feedback and share things, lessons learned and the results of your efforts internally and externally. So maybe at your airport or organization, you can streamline future projects by sharing, okay, what went well deploying these vehicles, what didn't, and what could we do differently? And also share those results externally. When I spoke to Kenny Williams, the former fleet manager at KCI, he recently retired, he said when he reached out to MEC, one of the things that really helped them was getting him platforms to share more about his project. So obviously Clean Cities coordinators, we learn a lot about different conferences and events at the national level in DC, locally. And he said MEC staff really helped him connect them to those resources. We hosted webinars so he could really share the benefits of what happened in the project. And this is one thing also mentioned in the guide, to develop a communications plan. So more information is on that. So how you're going to communicate internally and externally about the project. And obviously that's something you'd probably work with your marketing department on as well. And then revisit those fleet profiles that Miriam just talked about. So if you were using the A-Fleet tool, maybe you had some data, but then some data you had to just use the default. What could you go back in and put your new data in to understand your fleet profile better? Are you on track to meet your return on investment goals? If not, what do you need to revisit and reevaluate? Begin data diving on a quarterly basis. So through all of our transportation projects, we have a quarterly report for the fleets we work with to complete. The template we use through the Department of Energy. If you'd like it, we could definitely share it with you, but it helps you look at, again, what's going on with the vehicles. And consider, what other drivers or technicians or other impacts that may be impacting how efficient the electric vehicles are. So a lot to do, but again, it's really important to revisit lessons learned and best practices and communicate those with as many people as possible internally, and especially with people like Clean Cities coalitions and your utility, so they can improve those programs and hopefully deploy more electric vehicles as a result. And so again, to what's next. So there's a lot more, obviously, beyond electric vehicles that you could do at an airport or a company, an organization. And again, airports are very complex, so it could probably be overwhelming. So again, identify those lessons learned from the project, identify next fleets to electrify, consider renewable energy, consider efficiency of the built environment. So obviously there's a lot of emissions and energy use in transportation at airports. There are also very large buildings that are using a lot of energy as well. So again, reach out to MEC on the building performance side. What efficiencies could you improve in the building itself, and set some really pie in the sky goals that, really long-term that you would like your airport to possibly accomplish. And, again, talk to all the departments, especially your policymakers. A lot of them may be excited to implement some of these really exciting projects in their term in office. So KCI has definitely done this since deploying their, again, originally back in the day, forget what year it was, their CNG buses and electric shuttle buses. I'm sure you guys have all seen the news about the KCI solar farm. In their new airport, they're going to have inductive charging for their EV buses. So when they're waiting for passengers, the bus will be charged while it's sitting there. They're also looking at deploying additional EVs, so vans, ground equipment. They deployed a hybrid John Deere. Not as familiar with those vehicles. It's pretty cool. We can send a video information out if you want more. And also the new airport is going to be a LEED certified building. So extremely efficient, which again, not only improves the airport's utility bills, but also just a cleaner and healthier environment for all the patrons and the visitors. And as well, again, think outside the box. Here on the left is a picture from another project of ours in Olathe. Their library in another location has these solar beam electric vehicle chargers. So, these are great options for if you have charging for, maybe at the airport for employees or visitors who are parking their cars for a while. So again, think outside the box and set those really pie in the sky goals. And I think what KCI has definitely seen, they are a leader, and it seems like they keep learning more and more from these projects, and it's spurring additional projects. So again, as they're going to, when people are moving to EVs or federal regulations come down, they're definitely going to be ahead of the pack, and people will be looking towards them as experts. So that's really exciting. And again, they're a great resource. Real quickly, some other projects, definitely reach out to us. We can share more information. We have a terminal truck electrification project here in Kansas City where some 100% electric yard trucks were deployed. Again, the city of Olathe deployed those public solar power EV chargers, and they have some EVs in their other city fleets. We've helped get some chargers installed at 24/7 travel stores across Kansas. There's an upcoming grant opportunity in EVs in underserved markets. That's Miriam is spearheading that project, and she can give you more information offline. In our Electrify Kansas, Electrify Heartland program, this started out as a 14-state initiative to deploy EVs. It's grown significantly. I don't know what the number is, but we oversee the project in Kansas, and we're kind of co-partners in Missouri. So there's a lot of opportunities. Again, check out our website, contact us. We can put you in the right direction. But that is all we had. If we had time, I don't know if Nikki, there were any questions. Again, I know that was a lot of information we flew through, and hopefully here soon that guide will be officially published and we can share it with you all. But there's Miriam and I's contact information as well if you have some questions.
Thank you, Miriam and Emily. Thank you so much. This is definitely a very great information and very good example for most agencies and for Kansans to know about the electric vehicles and making cities more greener and cleaner. So do we have any questions? Andy, he did. Okay, we do have one question. So do you know if there are any ADA 480-816 compliant EVs?
That's a really good question, Miriam. I don't know, are the buses at KCI ADA compliant, you know?
I am not sure off the top of my head. I wrote in one and I don't recall, but I'm sure that we could get that information. Those buses are from BYD. So you can also learn more about the different types of buses that and accessibility from BYD on their website as well.
Okay, we have one more question. On the grant for underserved communities for EV charging, what qualifies a community for those grants?
So that is an upcoming grant opportunity. And so we have not released the application eligibility requirements. But if that's something that you're interested in keeping up on, please go ahead and send me an email directly and or sign up for our newsletter. And I can go ahead and post the link to that in the chat.
That'd be great.
Awesome.
Also, Miriam, if you have it, maybe the newsletter and the possibly on our website too, there is again, more information is coming, but a press release.
Let's see. Okay, our next question is, what are the most important differences in the relevant considerations for EV buses in airport fleets and in municipal public transit fleets?
That's a good, sorry, I keep passing these to you, Miriam. Obviously, it is similar, but EV buses at an airport obviously don't leave the airport. It's a much smaller area, obviously still large. But Miriam, I'm going to hand that over to you if there are any major different considerations.
I think you really touched on it. That's the big one. And so if you're operating in that small area, then it's really easy to know that your buses will be able to find a charging station, for example, versus if you are operating throughout the city and there may not be locations for your bus to charge when it's away from home base. And so that might mean that you might need to look at those routes again and maybe redesign some of those for the electric buses. Now, of course, Emily mentioned with the airport system as they are all sort of running, the same routine every day in that same area, they're able to actually park on a wireless charging pad as they're loading and unloading those passengers. And so that's one way that the charging can be much more efficient with an airport bus deployment versus if you're looking at a citywide transit fleet, you might have more concerns with that charging infrastructure.
One thing I'd want to add to that, Miriam, I think when I talked to the Charlotte airport, one thing they said is Clemson University had deployed EV buses at their university. Again, likely smaller than a city, but they reached out to them. So I think that's one important. I know we can get you connected with fleets who have deployed EV shuttle buses in their municipal fleet. So I think it's always really great to talk to the people who've done it. So research, and obviously Clean Cities, we can help you research if you're a municipality, what other municipalities have. You can learn from them. And then there are a lot of similarities as well. So I think, you can still learn from, a university if you are an airport or whatnot. So I think that's important as well, talking to people who have done it, and they are going to have the best responses regarding lessons learned and things they considered.
Got it. I think David had a note on the ADA compliant is ADA isn't all, they already are compliant. ADA isn't exactly new federal law. We have also gotten feedback from EV bus fleet managers discussing occasional issues with the chairlifts. However, the confirmation is needed. Okay.
Thank you, David. We can check in with KCI Airport and see, how they worked that out with BYD and if they had any issues with that.
That's a good question.
And our next question is, under what conditions would you recommend a bus fuel source other than either electricity or diesel?
So the reality right now is that, electric buses, they are much more expensive and the infrastructure can be as well. And as Emily mentioned in her presentation, Some utilities have programs and rates that are set up to help you save money, and others don't have that set up. And so one thing that Clean Cities, what we do is we work with fleets to help them understand all of their options and what that might look like with different fuels. And so there may be some situations where it's simply not feasible for an airport to go all electric just yet. Maybe because the funding just isn't out there, and maybe because of the high costs associated with it. And in those cases, there are other alternative fuels that can be used that can still reduce emissions and get rid of those harmful diesel particulates while still not being zero emission like an electric bus. At KCI, they have seen great success with their natural gas buses. And in fact, they had run natural gas buses for a long time before they decided to go EV. And so a lot of times what we see is that fleets see natural gas as a bridge fuel. Maybe electric vehicles aren't really attainable for them just yet, so they opt for natural gas in the meantime. But in the case of KCI and like what we're seeing across the country is that the cost of these electric vehicles is going down. The price of natural gas is going up. And so for many airports now, especially with all of the additional federal funding available, it's much more financially viable to go all electric and completely bypass natural gas. But it is still an option. And again, I would contact your Clean Cities Coalition for more information.
Thank you, Miriam. So Miriam has also posted a sign-up link for their newsletters. We would highly recommend to sign up for those newsletters, and also one more article link on the chat. So our next question is, how close are we to it being profitable for someone to open public EV charging station with a business model like that of a gas station, which also like without grants or exclusive contracts or as a way of selling a specific brand of vehicle?
You know, I can take a stab at that, and I'll also see if Emily has any thoughts on it. That's a tough one. It's really hard to predict when something like that will be profitable here in the United States, but we do believe that at some point it will be. We've seen that most of our major car manufacturers and the Biden administration has put targets on electric vehicles. And so it is likely that in the future, we'll see that the majority of vehicles on the road are electric rather than gasoline. Now, that being said, electric vehicle charging infrastructure is quite expensive to install, and particularly the gas station model is expensive because you need to have really, really high powered charging infrastructure to charge a lot of vehicles very quickly. And a lot of times gas stations are not necessarily located in an area with that type of electrical power already, especially if you have these gas stations along the interstate and smaller towns and more rural areas. That's going to be very, very costly upgrade. Additionally, many people who operate electric vehicles for personal use charge them at home, like their cell phones, and many fleets who operate them charge them, at their location, like the airport does. So that being said, again, I will reiterate, the Biden administration is releasing a lot of federal funding for charging stations in the gas station model, and there's a lot of federal funding that will be available to offset those costs. And again, if you're interested in learning more about that, I'd contact your local Clean Cities Coalition, as well as your state Department of Transportation, as they are in charge of designing those plans. Emily, do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I was just going to say our Clean Cities coordinator for Central Kansas has worked with several 24/7, close with them 24/7 travel stores. So if you have any specific follow-up questions, we could connect you with her. But this did remind me of something that I did not say in the project or the presentation. So when Miriam just mentioned that The fast chargers are more expensive because it requires additional power, and to charge those vehicles a lot quicker. A lot of times when you're in something like an airport, or if you're newer to it, I've heard people say they assume, well, every charger I have has to be a fast charger. Obviously, yes, at a gas station, that is ideal. But at some place like an airport, that is not necessarily the truth. So when you're analyzing your airport's energy use with your utility, and working with, your Clean Cities coordinator or university, you can say, okay, maybe at this location at the airport, we do need fast chargers, but maybe at this part of the airport, we only need level 2. So that's something important to consider as well. And then also future proofing it, because you want to have the right infrastructure in. So in a couple of years, you're not having to go back and update. So again, infrastructure, as probably kind of gleamed over it too much in the presentation, is the most obviously complex project of deploying electric vehicles. So again, consider all those partners, because they'll make sure you get the right infrastructure implemented at the right locations. And so you're not going back in a couple of years and updating them. So that's not relevant to the question. I think Miriam answered it, but something I forgot to mention in the presentation, it reminded me.
Thank you. So our next question is, are you able to find EV vehicles that meet Buy America?
Yes, the vehicles that we deployed under the KCI project met the Buy America requirements. That was necessary because there were a lot of different grant funds that were involved in that deployment, and will continue to be involved in that. So we made sure that all of those buses would meet the Buy America requirements.
And David here has shared something interesting, an article. It is about it is from Seeking Alpha. The article is about their level of reporting on business and technologies, which looks pretty solid, and some information here on EV, bus OEMs, and Buy America status. So everyone take a look at it. Any more questions? Thank you, David, for sharing the piece.
David is, if you didn't know, he's one of our Kansas City Regional Clean Cities coordinators. So as you can see, the coordinators are full of a ton of information and have a lot of experience. So thank you, David.
The random stuff is useful. Okay, so if you don't have any more questions, I think we are good. And yes, feel free to reach out to Miriam and Emily if you have any questions. We understand the important and the questions that you want to ask. They might pop up anytime after this 5 minutes. So Emily and Miriam, I think you guys are okay if people email you, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Please, definitely.
Okay, that's awesome. So yes, and we are KETC. We are open to take any comments and questions, and anything that you want us to connect to any other consultant or agency. We are happy to do that. So feel free to reach out to us and MEC if you have any questions about the electric vehicles. So otherwise, thank you all. Thank you so much. You all have a great Tuesday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.